Good morning. This is Daybreak, and thank you for staying with us. The hashtag on X is Citizen Daybreak. The SMS code is 22422 at Citizen TV Kenya and at Ayub Abdikadir this morning. And Demas Kiprono is the acting executive director at the ICJ Kenya. Thank you, Demas.
Thank you for
lovely having you here on the broadcast.
Yes.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be talking about the plan to decongest our prisons. There are several plans, and this, fortunately, is a multi-stakeholder effort in bid to depopulate Kenya's prisons, which are stretched beyond their capacity and the chronic overcrowding crisis. Before we begin with the accounts of what's to be done, let's take a look at this graphical representation of so far what we have sourced from a speech by the Chief Justice Martha Koome and also the task force report by Chief Justice Emeritus David Kinani Maraga. And for instance, in the Nairobi region, the total number of inmates so far are 9,458. Convicts are 2,496, double that number who are unconvicted but still are in prisons, 4,962. This is where now the dilemma lies. Also, in Nairobi region, industrial area remand and maximum prison is operating at 200% of its capacity, according to the Chief Justice, which is a concern for stakeholders in the decongestion of prisons. And in the financial year 2023-24, the sentences reviewed were 6,555 and 2,918 individuals were released. We'll talk about the number that continues to remain. According to the task force report by the former Chief Justice David Kinani Maraga, some of the challenges facing the Kenya Prison Service include underfunding, corruption, low pay, poor work and living conditions of the Kenya Prison Service personnel, which he said must be addressed. Prison population also, according to the numbers that we are displaying on your screens at the moment, correctional facilities capacity is total 20,750. The population of prisoners across the country in 2023 is 54,750. This has exceeded the capacity by 34,000, and the occupancy rate at the moment is 161%. And the following numbers also is an indication of the prison population. 41% of that number is at the pre-trial detainees, as displayed on your screens. Ladies and gentlemen, we start on that note, and before I take your accounts in relation to that, first beginning with you, Demas. 24 hours earlier, we had our first woman Attorney General, and who will serve in a crucial docket within the criminal justice system. And given that we had Martha Koome as our first woman Chief Justice, how are women in Kenya breaking the glass ceiling given the achievements that they have made over time, and what does this reflect of the Kenyan society in general?
I think, first of all, women in the legal profession right now occupy higher numbers in terms of admission to the universities and admission also to the practice of law. Number two is that the judiciary is, first of all, the only arm of government that went beyond the two-thirds gender requirement.
Yeah.
And now, as it stands, the judiciary is at 50-50 in terms of judges, magistrates, and registrars. And you know famously that our judiciary is almost entirely led by women.
Yes.
Right now. And so when we see an Attorney General that has now broken that ceiling,
yeah.
We have the first woman Attorney General, it adds to the progress that we see within the legal profession generally, but also now this is a senior, a person who's probably a member of the cabinet,
yeah.
Really, and has served the country at various positions, even in state law and in the ODPP's office.
Yeah.
And so it's a good thing to see women rise.
Yeah.
which is in the spirit of the Constitution, because the Constitution, being a transformative document, really dictated that we also deal with these gender disparities within our society.
Thank you.
And so it is, first of all, congratulations to her.
Yeah. Demas, coming to you, and the topic at hand, this is on the plan to decongest prisons and the commitment equally the government has said it will undertake, including Interior CS Professor Kithure Kindiki, who earlier this year announced plans were underway to establish a prisoner enterprise fund, which he said will come in handy in supporting inmates as they left or leave prisons. We'll be doing a quotation of the same, but the operation of the prisons is way above their capacities and now on the verge of collapse. How can this chronic overcrowding in prisons be addressed from a multi-stakeholders perspective, given that you are a representative of the ICJ here in Kenya?
Yes. First of all, when we are over capacity within our prisons, it means the quality of life of inmates is not at par with international standards, which means that even the main aim of rehabilitation is sort of defeated, because the situations that they find themselves in, the equipment that they have, we can even say the food and bedding and so forth is not as par with the international standards. And so, first of all, we need to modernize our prisons. We need to expand our prisons, first of all. However, I think we need to acknowledge the work that has been done by many actors, including the National Council on Administration of Justice, led by the Chief Justice, the ODPP, and civil society organizations within the country, because part of the problems that have been sort of begun to be addressed is, for example, the issue of petty offenses. And we have seen efforts, for example, in 2015, there was an audit of the criminal justice system. That audit really found out that if you look at the criminal justice system, it's mainly the poor who are incarcerated. It's mainly the poor and the young who are charged with petty offenses and so on and so forth. And there was an injustice in that whole scenario. Fast forward to this year.
And then the poor, then what are the contributory factors? Is it the lack of legal representation?
That is one.
Yeah.
There's one, lack of legal representation, and there's others whose status really put them in proximity with the criminal justice system. So, for example, if you're a hawker in town, if you're a tout, you will likely be arrested under petty offenses and find yourself in the criminal justice system not just once but many times. Whereas a person of means and a person in more, as it were, mainstream careers and so on and so forth would not find themselves in that predicament. And so what, first of all, I'd like to congratulate the National Council on Administration of Justice is, one thing is that they have a bill now on really declassifying and sometimes removing certain petty offenses within our statute books. That will now begin to give us ways to really deal with these offenses in a way that people won't end up in prison, or people won't end up in pretrial detention. The other thing is we are now also looking at our bail and bond parameters, so that also we would not be finding scenarios where, because a person does not have money, they are really spending a majority of their life incarcerated because they don't have money. And
Demas, given the government's announcement through the Interior CS Professor Kithure Kindiki, who on the 29th of February stated that a prisoners' enterprise fund will come in handy to support inmates as they leave prisons and also the reintegration process. He said to quote him, this fund will assist inmates with a startup kit and a small grant which will help them reintegrate with the community once they release. I will also speak to the Attorney General so that the plan of Power of Mercy helps to decongest our prisons. How key is that? Because in 2021, his predecessor, Dr. Fred Matiang'i, announced the release of 5,000 petty offenders in a decongestion program involving the judiciary and the prison services. But it seems, despite that, the number hasn't lessened. Rather, we are having the chronic overcrowding problem of prisons.
Yes, there have been pushes to decongest prisons through cooperation between the DPP, the judiciary, and the correctional facilities in the past. And I remember the recent one was during the COVID pandemic, where thousands of inmates were released. But what we've noticed is that soon after, the numbers start growing again, which goes back to the recommendations of the Maraga Task Force on terms of service of the police and prisons. You know, we seem to have concentrated mostly on the police reforms part, but forgot that the prisons were also part of those reforms. And one of the recommendations was really that the prisons are grossly underfunded. And so I think a kitty of that sort that was announced by the cabinet secretary is important, because we need to invest in our people, and so that if we decided that they need to be rehabilitated and we say that they have been rehabilitated, we should be able to now equip them with the resources and the knowledge to reintegrate so that they can be part of society. Otherwise, it defeats the purpose to put them out into the world and they are not equipped, which means that they will likely go back to the kind of conduct that took them there in the first place.
But Demas, you mentioned a very important point. If we are to look at it from the caretaker's perspective, here is what the Maraga Task Force said on the Kenya Prison Services on underfunding, because he itemized underfunding, corruption in the Kenya Prison Service, and leadership problem as some of the major challenges in the report he handed over to the president. And he mentions in many prisons across the country, the KPS officers live in conditions that are dehumanizing. In the case of the Kenya Prison Services, and their families live in mud housing, dilapidated, congested, and in condemned structures. In some stations, different families live in dormitories, with each family only separated by a bedsheet curtain. I mean, here is the downside of the challenges facing the caretaker, who is supposed to be looking at the welfare of the prisoners. Again, it's a double tragedy given the conditions of prisoners themselves. So how then do we address this double problem of the caretaker and those who are in custody?
It is investment in the facilities and in the personnel. Just like the strides that we've tried to do with the police in terms of housing, we need to really ensure that our officers who work in the prisons also live a dignified life, so that they can participate in the rehabilitation of the inmates. Otherwise, having a situation as you've described, where our officers are living in dilapidated situations, really defeats the purpose of rehabilitation from the word go. Because then how will they be able to really interact with the inmates as much as they're supposed to be really keeping them confined while rehabilitating them, and also seeking retributive justice at the same time? They must be able to live a dignified life. And that's why I began saying that when the prisons are overcrowded, it is a mess for everyone. It is a mess for the prison officers, it's a mess for the inmates. Everyone gets a raw deal. Another thing is that I remember a long time ago, we used to have the problem of these units, for example, in prisons where inmates that have, for example, contagious diseases like TB are kept. And you realize that they were kept there alongside an officer, which means that officer is being exposed to the same thing that is being isolated. And so real special programs that transform prisons, akin to what we saw under Moody Awori, who was the vice president at the time and Home Affairs Minister, are needed to ensure that really we are giving dignity to our officers, which in turn ensures that they will be able to serve our people in a more effective and meaningful way.
All right. Demas, one of the other issues that was pointed out by the Interior CS was that every inmate has to have their bed and mattress. The government will partner with the private sector, he said, to make sure that one prisoner, one bed, one mattress program is successful. He also talked about prisoners, especially because of the large tracts of lands that they own, there's need for innovation around the same to produce food for themselves, to be creative with the enterprise fund that the government proposes to set up. Is this then the humane way of, whilst we have talked about those who need not to be in prisons, is this a humane way of also focusing on those who are serving long-term sentences and their treatment, which according to that finding by the LSK is very wanting given the state of prisons across the country and the decongestion plan that the government and the non-state actors have?
Yes, so once we decongest, it means that we will have more resources to expend on those people who are bona fide incarcerated for one reason or another. And that means that they would have proper meals, proper accommodation, and proper activities to pass their time even as they are incarcerated. And we have seen other countries that have embraced these approaches. For example, Scandinavian countries where actually prisoners live as if they're in hotels, yet they are not enjoying their time there because they are confined. And so they have more time to think about activities for rehabilitation and to make amends for what they have been found to, by the law, to have done. Yes, so we still go back to the issue of more funding.
Yeah.
As much as prisons have large tracts of land, for example, we also have examples, for example, even in the US, where there is a prison industrial complex in itself. We want to avoid that. I would better go for a model where we fund the dignified life of prisoners and the dignified life of the officers who are taking care of them.
Yeah. A short while ago, we were joined by Demas Kiprono, who is the acting executive director at ICJ Kenya. And thank you for your time. The hashtag on X has been Citizen Daybreak. The SMS code is 22422 at Citizen TV Kenya and at Ayub Abdikadir. Thanks for waking up with us here on the broadcast. We'll see you on Friday here at the same time. Till then, good morning.